You stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Well, this is the very one of the most very famous lines in the Matrix franchise film series. That's well said by Morpheus. Well, the reason why I'm making this video because there is really a whole truth behind all this. Socialism doesn't work, and it's been parroted all over the mainstream media. It's been parroted in media outlets, think tanks, institutes, organizations, pundits, commentators, and I'm one of those that used to believe all this narrative, and I was always fed this narrative of how the reason why countries are poor, the reason why people are poor, the reason why people are in poverty is because of socialism or people relying on handouts or welfare. You know, all this crazy nonsense as I'm realizing to be it now. So let's take a look in a economic perspective that has been too politicized of one of the reasons why we hear all this narrative about socialism doesn't work. And the true reason why countries that claim to be socialist or that want to strive towards a socialist system tend to fail. So the narrative that you hear about because they were trying to strive towards socialism, they want government control, they want to hoard the wealth, this narrative. And that's the same story we hear from people with big money in New York, the New York Stock Exchange, and even government officials in Washington even parrot this narrative. But the real whole truth is that it's really far beyond to what people think, or people in the anti-socialist circle who narrate this, who don't have a problem with corporate greed or tend to blame people who are pro-poor as to the result of inflation. So the world currency exchange is the American dollar, and the financial capital in the world is actually based in New York, which is the United States, even though that organizations like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund are all based in Washington. But the whole reason of this is that you have to go through New York to do business trade. New York is almost like the capital of where all the economic trading is, because it's part of the result of the Bretton Woods Agreement. So this was the agreement where the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations will be formed. So once the IMF and the World Bank was already set up, so the American dollar was already set up to be the official currency for trading. So in this kind of system, I haven't looked at the further details, but what I can tell you is that in this system, you have to go through New York if you want to do business trade with other countries. So let's say example, in socialist Cuba, as they like to use this as a role model of the reason why socialism failed and why people are poor and why the country is in decay, because look at it this way. If you're a European company, let's say you're like a construction company, you want to do business trade with Cuba, you have to go through New York in order to do trade. So like example, I know of one case where someone told me in China, if you want to do business with Puerto Rico, you have to go through New York first to make sure things are processed and things are, all in hands, and then they can go to Puerto Rico to do business economic trade. So, well, even though that there are some countries that still do business trade with Cuba, Spain, and other South American countries. But especially this from these so-called U.S. allies, it's just that we you cannot go through Cuba without going to New York. And what we're witnessing in Cuba is the 6 decades of economic embargo, economic sanctions by the United States. And this is an example of how sanctions work against Cuba. You do business with Cuba without any knowledge of the New York Stock Exchange, without going through New York. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the whole U.S., is going to stage an embargo on your business. It's going to shut down your business for good, freeze your assets, and shut down your business for good as punishment for trying to do business. So that's how this type of economic system works. The other thing is that Vietnam is actually a good example of a socialist country. When the United States opened its diplomatic ties and diplomatic relations 20 years after the end of the Vietnam War. It was a time when Vietnam was going through harsh sanctions, harsh embargo as punishment for winning the Vietnam War against the United States. That was when they opened some trade relations, and that's why Vietnam is what I would consider a semi-capitalist, because they uplifted some capitalist system and this socialist economy. And that's when, that's why, even though that Vietnam's still a poor country, in some economic aspects, it's still doing well, and it's still doing well for some business trading and people in small business, or the name goes on. But so here's the question: why is it that some countries in the global south, or countries in the Americas, Africa, parts of Asia, if they have close business ties or close economic trade with the United States, why are they still poor? Why are they as poor as Cuba? They're never embargoed. They are never sanctioned by the United States. But why are they poor? But it's one thing: big business, corporate greed, stealing of natural resources by corporations, and lots of corporate extortions from big corporations funneling into these countries. Example is why people like that famous United Fruit Company in Guatemala was mostly like sucking up all the natural fruits, which was the natural resource or the main exports from Guatemala around at the time during the so-called U.S. presence in Central America. So when the very famous the last and only democratic elected president in Guatemala by the name of Jacob Arbenz challenged the corporate greed in the United Fruit Company and wanted to nationalize it, the big honchos in the company asked the CIA to come and start a coup d'etat and kill Arbenz, and that would lead to decades of the Guatemalan civil war between indigenous groups and those of Spaniard descent. Haiti is another good example of why are there so many NGOs trying to help lift Haiti? Why are there companies coming in and they're supposed to be the ones to help thrive Haiti's economy? Haiti is another good example of, it's labeled as the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. And these companies are coming in, they're also looting the resources of Haiti, and lots of gangs and crime rates high in Haiti. But you don't hear this in the media. But it's a good example of how both in the interventions, both by France and the United States, have really caused Haiti to be poor, even in spite the fact that Haiti would have been rich, and Haiti, this thing like this independence debt to France would have easily been part of the past had it not been for the misleadership and corruption from Haitian leaders, and of course the intervention by the CIA, obviously. And had they not been bullying like that very famous President Aristide, had it not been for foreign intervention, Haiti would have been getting itself up from poverty. Had it not been for foreign intervention. And that's the truth, because as I puzzle this in, it's mostly been about foreign intervention that kept Haiti to be controlled and to be poor. So, but that's what you will never hear, especially here in the United States, like this building where I am standing right now. And anyone who exposes the truth of the economic system, that sanctions and embargo and intervention really keeps countries poor and keeps corporate greed thriving, and corporations loot all the resources from one country to another, are easily slandered as communists, Marxists, leftists, and anti-American or anti-West, for exposing the schemes and the scams behind all this economic disasters. So you have to keep this in mind. If you want to do, let's say, if you're China wanting to do business with Brazil, you have to go through New York to get things processed in order to get ready to do business trade or business deals with Brazil. But if Brazil is under sanctions or embargo by the United States, they'll tell eventually, no, don't do business or don't do trade with, Brazil. But if China thinks out of the box and starts to, do business with, Brazil, the Chinese companies who want to do business will easily be embargoed, will easily be sanctioned. Their assets will be frozen. All their money will be taken away. And their companies will shut down for good, in courtesy of the U.S. government. That's the whole truth. So those who say that embargoes and sanctions are not the reason why countries are poor, the government or the socialist governments are the reason why countries are poor, well, show them how the economic system works. I don't have an economics background, but my mother does. But I've puzzled things of how this type of economic bullying really leads to disasters for countries and destabilization. Which one thing that leads to this? In the height of the Russia's invasion of the Ukraine war, there was an immense amount of silence from the global south or countries that are not aligned with the West. Even though that people on the far right, pro-West chauvinists, or people on the far left, anti-West, or Western left specifically, have been mostly aligned with Russian talking points, or have been speaking out against Ukraine resistance, because and particularly in the global south, it is very much understandable why these countries from the Americas and Africa would unreasonably side with Russia, even though Russia was the invader, and Ukraine was the one invaded by Russia. Well, because they're tired of games with the West, who has been loudly support for Ukraine solidarity. They're fed up with the types of economic injustices imposed by nations in North America or Western Europe, and they're tired of the games to um, to use these countries only for mechanical support or support at times that there's conflict. And these countries have been neglected by these Western European countries in North America. And they're fed up with the harsh embargo and sanctions imposed by the United States, which is why the reason why they're joining the alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, or BRICS as the economic alliance of these BRICS nations, because they're sick and tired of the dollar being used as a weapon to keep countries poor. They're tired of this economic embargo and sanctions being used as a weapon against countries that the United States doesn't like. They're also tired of the embargo and sanctions being used to economically strangle these countries. So that's the reason why there's kind of a panic in the West of this whole Russia, China, India, Brazil alliance with other countries that have been economically suppressed by the United States. So that's the reason why there's kind of been a divide of support for Russia or support for Ukraine from these countries. So in overall, to end this video, so this is how the United States kind of tends to strangle countries and try to overthrow governments they don't like. They economically strangle these countries with sanctions and embargo and harsh policies. They try to starve its people into hunger and choke their political systems, and leading them to the so-called revolution uprisings that are even sponsored by Central Intelligence Agency or its head honcho partner, the National Endowment for Democracy, giving these awards to so-called democratic leaders or democratic opposition activists, sharing their testimony, or I call them so-called testimony, of the reason of how they love the support of the United States and the U.S. will help them overthrow the so-called dictatorship government and start overthrowing them, and then install a neoliberal free market U.S. capitalist system, and allowing big companies from the United States to come in and loot the resources of these countries. One example of this is the Arab Spring, and the Arab Spring has been a very controversial issue because the so-called color revolutions, which was supposedly sponsored by the National Endowment for Democracy, that name is a fucking joke anyway. Basically, example like I don't know how it is in Tunisia nowadays, but in Libya, they say that Muammar Gaddafi was this dictator and we need to come in and start overthrowing him because he's oppressing freedom, he's suppressing freedom of speech, or freedom of the press, or economic freedom, kind of thing. And so, but if you actually look at how the economic system in Libya was, it was a fantastic country. It was even though that it was a dictatorship, Gaddafi was bad, but at least he was able to provide benefits and give social welfare to all Libyans. After he was overthrown, even until this day, there's a lot of civil war and destabilization in Libya, and that's why that infamous Benghazi incident that led to that Libyan ambassador being killed. So the bottom line is, who are watching this, that this is how this economic warfare really serves the interests of people from the highest ranking elites and all the elites who reap benefits from these types of dangerous things. So Even though I'm in the business sector, that's the reason why I'm opening this up, even though I don't have this type of backgrounds, because I have done further research of this. So this is my video, and I'll see you all in my next segment.